After discussing which Locust and COG characters could appear in Gears of War E-Day, I think it's now time to discuss which weapons we will get to see and use in the game. Since Gears E-Day takes place 14 years before the very first Gears of War game, there would have been many weapons that existed in that time period, alongside weapons we may have never seen, weapons from the Pendulum War era from the COG, UIR, and even weapons that made their way into Locust hands that were later heavily modified. The Locust may have had previous older weapons as well from their war against the Lambent underground in the Hollow. But as the Locust War progressed, some of these weapons could have just been replaced or later became scarce. So as always, I'm your host Abz, and let's discuss which new weapons could appear in Gears of War E-Day. So firstly, let's discuss potential COG and UIR weaponry that could appear in the game. But let me just reiterate that we can generally assume that we will see a lot of the iconic weapons from the previous games, such as the Nasher shotgun, the Retro Lancer, and later on we would see the Lancer chainsaw, the Longshot sniper rifle, the Snub pistol, the Scorcher flamethrower, the Mulcher, the Mortar, the One-Shot, the Bolo grenades, and so on, since these are the weapons that were used throughout the Locust War and also being seen in Gears Judgment, which was shortly after Emergence Day. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to dig into some good stuff here, because here are many weapons from the extended media that I believe would be a great idea to appear in the game. So let's kickstart the human weaponry ideas. How crazy is it that throughout the Locust War, we never even used a rocket launcher, apart from on a Silverback, which is mind-boggling to actually think about, considering the vast array of weapons at the COG's arsenal, and even with it being seen in cut concepts and comics. The rocket launchers were used by both the COG and the UIR during the Pendulum Wars, whether it was to take out heavy ground vehicles, air support, or even infrastructure. I really want to use a rocket launcher in E-Day, especially considering the crazy amounts of Locust we may see on screen. We're gonna need some crazy firepower. There were also rocket launcher variants, such as the Long Spear variant. This was a laser guided older model variant that could dispatch ground targets as well as aerial targets within a limited range. Now imagine using the Long Spear rocket launcher to try and lock on and take out Locust Reavers in the vicinity. That would be really cool and would be a very different way of taking on the Reavers than how we've done before. In the Pendulum War era, the Lancer Mark I or Retro Lancer had a variant that had a grenade launcher attached, and this variant was called the Gut Puncher. These were actually used on the Battle of Asphalt Fields. Obviously they didn't do as much damage as the rocket launchers, but still a very viable option within a closer range. This was pretty much the predecessor to the Lancer grenade launchers we saw in Gears 5. But yeah, I think some badass Gut Puncher Lancer Mark I variants would be juicy. In terms of the iconic Hammer of Dawn, I think it could appear in very limited capacity. Small scale controlled strikes, where Locust presence is extremely heavy and you could just see it in the background on a Corpser or something as you're making your way through the city. I think if we do get to use the Hammer of Dawn in the game, it should just be very limited minutes of satellite coverage, like in Gears 1, but that's if there's a targeting laser nearby, which could be a whole mission in itself. The sawed-off double-barreled shotgun that was actually present in Gears Judgment's timeline shortly after E-Day. They could definitely return and could also make their way into the hands of certain Locust Grenadiers. And with the huge amounts of enemies, you may just need the good old reliable sawed-off in close quarters to wipe out multiple drones in one shot. The semi-automatic drum-loaded grenade launcher used by the UIR during the Pendulum Wars, the Bushka grenade launcher. It was seen in the early Locust War era as well, since it also appeared in Gears Judgment. I think it would be cool to use the Bushka to ricochet projectiles into huge groups of Locust. Next, I think it's a possibility that we could see the two UIR Markser rifle variants from the Pendulum War era. The GZ-18 semi-auto sniper rifle, which offers something different compared to the COG's Longshot bolt-action sniper rifle, with its faster fire rate, reload time, and larger magazine at the expense of a less powerful scope. And the Markser MK1 variant, which didn't have a scope, but had iron sights and a shorter barrel. But both Markser variants would be a very welcome addition to E-Day in my book, weapons that were heavily used just shortly before and after Emergence Day. However, if the UIR's marksman rifles don't appear, then I think it would be good to see the COG's DMR appear, which basically was the COG's answer to the UIR's Markser. and this was Padrick Sultan's main weapon of choice during the Pendulum Wars. So as we discussed in my last video, if we see Pad Sultan appear, then he needs to have his trusty DMR alongside him, and if he's in our squad, then we'll just get him to swap weapons with us, and take the DMR off him so we can get to work doming some Locust drones. The tripwire crossbow from Gear's Judgment could be another welcome addition, perhaps, if there are any situations where we need to defend a position and place traps for the Locust, which is highly likely, so I wouldn't mind using the tripwire crossbow again. Remember the Vulcan Gatling gun? I would love to use this again, especially as a duo as Marcus and Dom, and to be honest, you're gonna need that crazy firepower to shred multiple Locusts into nothing but bits. It also appeared in Gear's Judgment as well, so yeah, they could make it work for Eday as well potentially. Considering that there may be times in the game where you really need to improvise and think on your feet, I think we could possibly do with some Molotov cocktails in the game. They were used in the Pendulum Wars, and were also used by the Stranded in the Locust War, so I think it could be an idea to use these in Eday. Speaking of improvisation, we're gonna need to use the power saws in the game if we do get that cutscene of Ty slicing a drone with the power saw, or like I said, if there's times where you need to improvise with no weapons around. Equipment like a power saw could just be of some great use, just like a nearby TV like we saw in the trailer. One more variant of the Lancer we could potentially see is the variant that the COG police would use. I really hope we get to see other COG departments like the police, and if we do, then we already have some established lore there, as in the books, it's stated that the police had a lighter and more basic variant of the Lancer Mark I. So that'll be quite interesting to see, although I'm not sure if we'll be able to use it. One cut concept I saw for Gear's tactics was the pneumatic battering ram, which would be freaking awesome to use. Being able to strike objects with extremely high velocity into Locust, or just to push things like cars out of the way. The pneumatic battering ram would be really cool to see in my opinion. I think it's a juicy concept, so let me know what you think of that. Right then, now we shall move on to the deadly Locust weapons I think could be in the game as well as my thoughts of course. But for Locust weapons we will generally assume that the Hammerburst rifle will appear, the Boltok pistol, the Boomshot grenade launcher, the Boom shield and the explosive flail, potentially the Gorgon pistols, and torque bows if the Theron guard or another Locust variant equips them, and so on. So firstly, I briefly want to talk about the Hammerburst rifle. There are two variants that were seen in the games during the Locust War. However, we have to see the Hammerburst Mark I in the game. This was the standard issue Locust AR early on in the Locust War, before the Mark II replaced it. So yeah, we definitely need to go back with the Hammerburst Mark I in Eday. Now if the Locust Rages do appear, then expect the Breach Shot rifle to return. The weapon that was built from the UIR's GZ-18 Marksman sniper rifles, which were captured and then modified by the Locust. Krav Jamad was actually seen using a breach shot rifle as well, and he was an expert with that weapon, so if Jamad is seen in the game, he would be using the breach shot rifle to devastate in use. I would love to see this weapon return for sure. The next weapon is not just for the Locust, but also the COG, and that is the use of combat knives in the game. I don't even know if the Locust even need to use theirs, given their brute strength, but the COG gears definitely will. Even though it won't be of much use, but could be used to slice up wretches and so on. Being able to take off the knife bayonet from the Retro Lancer would also be a little cool feature in my opinion. A very rare, modified weapon used by the Locust's Theron Elite, seen in the Realm Shadow DLC 9 years after Eday, was the Elite Sword-Off Shotgun. I'm not too sure if this weapon will be in the game, but I don't mind if this weapon is also equipped by the Locust captains or lieutenants. That way it still stays as a rare weapon and keeps its integrity as a formidable weapon, only used by certain ranking Locust. If the Locust Tremors appear in Gears of War Eday, then expect to see them with their big boy Tremor hammer and the Thumper spike that they would hit into the ground to call up Cedars up from underground to the surface. Considering it's Emergence Day, I think we have to see the Tremors and Cedars appear. It would be interesting to see if we're able to use the Tremor hammer though. But as a human, you may just have to use two hands, similar to how we used the cleavers. Next, I think it would be pretty cool to see the emulsion explosive canisters used by the Locust on Emergence Day, and onwards to cause destructive damage to buildings, people and more. I think that would be a really interesting addition. Now this one could be unlikely, but if the Locust Grenadier Ravagers appear in the game, then we could see them use the breaching charges to clear obstacles such as doors and walls as they try to take you down. As mentioned in my Locust discussion video for Gears Eday, I'd love to see the Master Boomer cut concept finally being brought to life. So if by any chance they make it in the game, then expect their crazy metal whip to appear and strike you from distance. That's gonna be crazy. Next up we have a weapon that was also a hollow creature, the Siege Beasts, that the Locust enslaved and used as a catapult-like machine. I can definitely see the Locust using the Siege Beast in the game to accurately destroy COG targets, King Ravens and more. It will be nice to see the Siege Beasts again. I think they deserve a bit more love considering how unique they are. One point that I want to make is that one of the many things that made no sense to me from Gears Judgment was seeing Locust Butchers as part of General Khan's army, when Butchers were assigned to just chop up rockworm meat in the Hollow. It made zero sense to have them there as part of General Khan's army, and so I don't think it's really needed to see the Butchers in Eday, and therefore I'd say no need for their Butcher Cleavers to appear either. One amazing weapon that I'm not sure will be in the game is the Digger Launcher. Although General Khan's mount, the Shibboleth, had a digger launcher attached to its prosthetic leg, but it was mainly used by the Savage Boomers 17 years after Eday during the Lambent pandemic in Gears 3. For me, I really loved using the digger, but having it in the game could potentially take away from the Savage Boomers as well. However, they can always create another creature that was used as a weapon as well by the Locust at the start of the war. But I'm not sure, I guess they could still make the digger work, but let me know what you guys think. I know a lot of you would love to see the digger again based off your comments and so on. We have the iconic Locust Ink Grenades seen being used by the Cantus in the games. Now, as I mentioned in my Eday Locust discussion video, I doubt the Cantus will appear, so I don't think the Ink Grenades should really appear either then. But I definitely believe that the Locust can have other types of grenades in the Eday timeline, because it can't just be that they only had ink and quill grenades at their disposal. Get creative with it, and potentially add other grenades that were also hollow creatures housed in grenade casings. One idea I'm thinking is just having a different species of digger creature containing a C4 that the Locust could use as explosive grenades, which were later phased out for the more efficient frag grenades looted from dead gears. I don't know, just get creative with some Locust grenades. The Locust double-barreled heavy machine guns, the Troika. I think the Troika should only appear if there's actually time for the Locust to have transported these machine guns from the Hollow to the surface. It would make no sense to see the Troikas on the surface straight away on Eday, but with how fast the Locust move and transport, it can always be possible, I guess. Finally, my last point is that what I also find quite odd is that the Locust never had their own version of the shotgun. They only used the COG's Nasher shotgun and the Sword-Off, but there needs to be a shotgun that they potentially used against the Lambent in the Hollow, and seeing that being used on Eday against the Gears, until it is phased out later on for the Nasher shotgun. I think that would be really interesting to see what shotgun they used, and what type of shotgun it would be, and the ammunition, whether it would be shells or another type of creature. Ultimately, the Coalition need to fully understand the timeline they're dealing with, and where both the COG and Locust were with their military tech and weapons that they used in their previous wars, just before Emergence Day. And they really need to get the creative juices flowing. Use the extended media and cut concepts for some inspiration, and especially with the Locust, there's so much you can do with them with so much lore from that timeline still being unexplored. But that, my friends, is what I think in terms of new weapons and returning weapons for Gears of War Eday. Please let me know what you think in the comment section below. Drop a like and do consider subscribing if you haven't done so already. And a big special thank you to the YouTube and Patreon members for your additional support as always. I'm your host Abz, and I will catch you guys next time.